Yeah, I know.
Because
I've been to Makassar.
yeah,
Please take your seats. We're going to get started.
which one? Can we choose?
Yes, just not the middle one.
Not the middle one.
Yeah. Go ahead. Can people please take your seats? We're about to get started. We're standing between myself and lunch, so I want to make sure I do my job. Welcome, everyone. My name is Noah Horowitz. I'm going to be moderating the panel today. I'm the director of the Clean Cooling Collaborative at ClimateWorks Foundation in the U.S. And we're here today to talk about the future of both space cooling and refrigeration in a warming world, with a focus on developing countries. And speaking of the future of cooling, I want to give a shout out to the IEA report called The Future of Cooling. If you haven't read this, I strongly encourage you to do so. And we're not just talking about the efficiency of this equipment, whether it's a fridge, a fan, or an air conditioner, but cooling also touches so many parts of our lives. You know, how do we design our buildings impacts how much cooling we're going to need, especially if it's mechanical cooling. Also, it affects the grid dramatically. All this air conditioning that's coming online is going to put stress on the grids. We're going to have power outages, and as we want to transition to a clean grid, the less power that's demanded, the faster and cheaper we can make that transition. And also the lack of cooling has great impacts on the food chain. We're going to dramatically increase the food chain, and also we need to make sure that's done sustainably. And also, and most importantly, all of this affects people's lives, their comfort, their health, and their livelihoods. So I want to leave you with 3 numbers. Do people still have a pen, or is everybody on their computer? Write these numbers down, please. 3 billion, 1 billion, and 100 gigatons. What do those numbers represent? They're going to be 3 billion, B as in boy, billion, more air conditioners installed around the world by 2050. 1 billion people today lack the access to cooling that they need. And if we get this right, working together, we could help prevent 100 gigatons of greenhouse gas emissions. That's 2 years' worth of global emissions. So there's a big task and a big opportunity here. Speaking of the lunch metaphor, we have a delicious sandwich prepared for you. It's going to rival the Danish Open sandwiches, and I can't pronounce smorgasbord properly, but I've enjoyed them. We have a special guest who will start. In the middle, we'll have a panel of 6 wonderful people who you'll hear from. They'll give some short comments, and then we'll have Q&A. And then for closing, or the bottom layer, Dr. Fatih Birol will give some closing comments. So with that, let's introduce the panel very quickly. We have Christine Egan from CLASP, if you can wave. We have Omnia El Amrani, the UN Youth Representative from Egypt, who's online. We have Ilham Habibi, the chairman of Lithabi Rekatama. We have Hakan Hamdi Bergalu, the CEO of Arçelik, a Turkish-based appliance manufacturer. We have Jürgen Fischer, the president of Danfoss Climate Solutions. And we have the ambassador of Cambodia, who's in Denmark here, Ambassador Khan. And without any further ado, it's my great pleasure to introduce the Foreign Minister of Denmark, Jeppe Kofod. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Noah. Thank you so much for welcoming me here. Listen, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very pleased to be here in Sønderborg on this very important day. And I'm happy that we can all come together from all over the world. And our world has changed dramatically. What we see now is a world with the unjust and horrible Russian invasion of Ukraine has not only brought immense suffering to the brave Ukrainian people, it has also changed geopolitics. It has changed our sense of security. It has changed how EU and the rest of the world must think and act. And it has changed the prices on energy and food, sending shock waves across the globe. We see financial instability, inflation, increase debt rates, for example. And today, everyone can see that energy policy, politics are security politics, and that is something we need to act on. The European dependence on Russian coal, oil, and gas was a strategic mistake. It has left us vulnerable. We need to phase out our dependency from Russian fossil fuels as fast as possible and maintain high pressure on Russia to end its invasion. And we need to phase out in order to go green and also to have the geopolitical space to act to defend our values. Green energy transition is a cornerstone, not only to fighting climate change, but also to enhancing energy security and food security. Science is crystal clear. We all know that we must reduce emissions from coal, oil, and gas to prevent environmental disaster. Coal could be phased out globally by it should be phased out globally by 2050, and oil and gas consumption reduced more than 50% to stay on pathways to the 1.5 degrees centigrade. We can address both the energy and food crisis as well as the geopolitical drivers behind them. We need to ramp up renewable energy around the world and, of course, and very importantly, increase energy efficiency globally. Here, I would say cooling plays a central part. Every year, 13% of total food production is lost because of the lack of effective refrigeration. It is enough to feed about 950 million people. Think about it, 950 million people loses food every year because we do not do this in a proper manner. And we cannot allow this waste to continue. We can lift millions out of hunger and poverty by creating climate-friendly cold chains. And moreover, meeting future cooling needs sustainably will cut 8 years' worth of global emissions. The Danish government is walking the talk at home and abroad to accelerate green energy transition and ensure independence from Russian oil and gas, in fact, from all fossil energies. We increase land-based wind and solar power by 4 times in 2030. We increase offshore wind capacity tenfold by 2050, supplying 230 million households with green electricity in collaboration with Germany, Belgium, and the Netherlands. We end oil and gas production in the North Sea, the latest by 2050, and we have already stopped issuing new licenses for production. We are setting up a global offshore wind alliance, GOVA, to upscale offshore wind globally. We work with more than 20 developing countries on just energy transition, including both renewable energy and, very importantly, energy efficiency, but also job creation, competence development, and also repositioning of mines, cooperation with unions, and so on. But most importantly and urgent, we need to bring down our energy consumption. Tools, technology, know-how to do just that, we have all of that in front of us. Demand side need to be in focus also. We have a lot of low-hanging fruits here, and I want to emphasize that. So yes, Denmark is a front runner in green energy supply and energy efficiency. And when I was younger and a member of the European Parliament, I recall the numbers that each time we reduce our energy consumption with 1% in the EU, we will reduce the need for total gas import by 2.6%. And if you look at the world today, we should have done it 10 years ago, but I think this fact still holds true and we should act now, and we have the tools to do it. But the scale and the solutions that we need to accelerate the green transition cannot be delivered by any member state single-handedly. It requires cross-border cooperation between governments, authorities, businesses, and financial institutions. And when it comes to our security, we also need cross-border cooperation. That is why we must engage in the EU, the NATO, in the UN, And we had a referendum in Denmark last Wednesday on the Danish opt-out from EU's common security and defense policy, and it shows that the Danish people have understood this, that we are interconnected. They clearly believe, like me, that Denmark should be at the heart of the EU as well when it comes to security. And when it comes to finding common solutions to all of our shared challenges, the green transition, creating economic growth, respectable jobs, and more, we must not forget that a level playing field in an open and fair and sustainable trade policy are the foundation for Danish and European wealth and also the international influence. We must seek to convert our economic strength into global influence while avoiding protectionism, which hampers economic growth and the development of new technologies. Therefore, I think a core task for Europe is to step up our defense for democracy, the rules-based order, free markets, and the value we believe in. Listen, Denmark and Europe are at a defining moment in history. The actions we take now will be critical to secure the green transition. And I think we all in this room knows that, well, the green or the energy we do not use is the greenest energy. The facts should be implemented in all of our thinking and policies globally, in my opinion. And I would like to end by saying that it is critical in ensuring that if we want to live in a world where we have prosperity, where we have peace, where we take care of the climate, that we will deal with the energy issue, and that's exactly what you're doing here. It's linked to all other things in life, and as a foreign minister, I'm proud to represent a country that is trying to take the lead, but I know that we can only succeed if we all work together, countries, business, civil society, investors, and also understanding the urgency of the matter. So thank you so much for listening to me, and have a great, great meeting. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Minister. Now we're going to turn to our panelists. We're going to start, and each panelist only has 2 minutes. We're trying to cram a lot of material, then we'll have some Q&A. Christine?
Can everybody hear me? Is the mic's good? So I want to emphasize as we start this panel on cooling that one of the essential building blocks to ensuring climate mitigation from the cooling sector is appliance standards and labeling, minimum energy performance that set the floor for how much these products can consume, and energy labeling that send a signal to both manufacturers and consumers on what the best products are. In a session yesterday, one of the panelists called for us to maximize the minimum, and I forget what the second half was, but anyway, it was really quite sharp. What was it? Somebody was there. And raise the bar, yes, but it was said better than this yesterday. These policies that I've just been talking about have the dual benefit of accelerating the uptake of newer, better technologies, and also halting the scale of the most inefficient. And just to give one example, air conditioner minimum energy performance standards in China will be able to convert the market to appliances that use highly efficient inverter technology in just a few years, and this in China will cut 206 million tons of CO2 by 2030. So these are not insignificant numbers. I always like to note that particularly with cooling, there is not just a mitigation aspect. Increasingly, as the world warms, we will need cooling devices such as fans, for example, which is what most of the world uses, as an adaptation and a resilience. These will increasingly be a public health need, and we need to not lose our focus on some of the lower tech technologies. Similarly, the phase out of inefficient appliances is incredibly important for countries that have been historically subjected to dumping of lower quality products from nations that often would not allow the same technology within their own borders. CLASP did a study a couple years ago that found that 35% of the air conditioners sold in many of Africa's largest countries are low efficiency units with energy efficiency ratings of less than 3 watts per watts, a commonly adopted standard around the world. The efficiency of the best available technologies at this time was nearly twice that much. For those countries seeking to tighten their regulations, to set a floor and an ambitious goal for what the ceiling is, there are tools that can help in setting regulations. I should mention the U4E model regulations on air conditioner that can guide countries. And of course, I would be remiss if I didn't mention that on the clasp.ngo website, you can access a tool called MEPSI, where you can actually get support for the analytical work, the modeling to set prospective standards levels and calculate savings and mitigation potential. And if I don't stop there, Noah's going to pull me off this stage, so I'll
Good
let
job,
it be.
Christine. Good modeling time management there. Online, we're pleased to have Omnia El Omrani, who's the UN Youth Representative from Egypt. Welcome.
Hello, everyone.
The floor is yours.
Okay, perfect. First of all, thank you so much for having me. It's such an honor to be part of your conference. In addition to my role working with the UN on climate change, I'm also a young medical doctor here in Cairo. And what I see every day in the emergency room are patients, especially as the summer increases, patients suffering from heat-related morbidities, mortalities, heat stroke, heat stress on an increasing manner, more than we have seen before. And this really brings in for me the urgency of addressing the importance of access to effective cooling, and also thinking about how the contribution of fossil fuels and non-renewable energy resources to such impact. On the other hand, as working with the UN, it gives me the opportunity to strengthen the messaging around the urgency of bringing climate action, of bringing in the youth perspective in a multidisciplinary, participatory manner, and as meaningful as I can, in order to drive the urgency needed, because climate change and the impacts of climate change are no longer an environmental issue, it's a human health issue. Now more than ever, we need the health and messaging to bring in what our call to actions closer to our communities, closer to home, as well as to the policymakers, by sharing the necessary personal stories of how people are struggling, which I get to see every day because of the increasing temperature. And on the other hand, not just having numbers or statistics, which is incredibly important, but also having personal stories.
Are we able to reconnect, or should we move on? Move on? Okay. Sorry about that, but we heard, right from the field how this is directly impacting people. You're back now. If you can wrap up, that would be great.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. In terms of wrap up, and my call to action is, first of all, to engage both young advocates in the plans, the policies being created, because impacts of climate change are an intergenerational issue that's going to impact current and future generations to come. As young people, we are very motivated. We have our innovative ideas to contribute to study in the issues that affect our health most. My second call to action would be utilizing the health argument, as WHO mentioned in COP26, the health argument for driving climate action, and in that sense, driving effective cooling, as well as the transition to net zero carbon. Thank you so much again.
Thanks so much for making the time. And for those that don't know, Dr. Omrani literally left surgery to join us today. We really appreciate your making the time. Next, we're going to turn to Ilham Habibi for some initial comments.
My name is Ilham. I'm from Indonesia, and I'd like to give you some updates about what is the cooling situation in Indonesia. And I'd like to talk about two aspects here. One would be the consumers, and the other one the industry, basically. Let's talk about the consumers first. A lot of things have been already said in the previous sections. For instance, the secretary or the executive director of IEA has said that about 15% of the households in Southeast Asia do have air conditioning already. In Indonesia, the figure is much lower. We have only 6%. So you can see that the more Indonesia develops, the more households will want to have an air conditioning, and so it's going to be a challenge to basically manage all that and keep it carbon neutral. At the same time, I think what we realize in Indonesia, the industry standard usually is something like 25 degrees room temperature, 50% relative humidity. We think that we should increase that standard for the industry so we can have some savings. Just little tweaks to those numbers can do a lot of effect. I think that was also said this morning. Another thing that I like to refer to, still talking about consumers or citizens need medical services like the lady just said. And Indonesia, like every country in the world, has gone through a dramatic COVID crisis. And as we all know, those COVID vaccines need cooling. In some cases, very, very deep refrigeration, like minus 80 degrees or something like this. And we can imagine that a lot of vaccines have really been basically not effectively and efficiently deployed because of the challenges in the logistical cold refrigeration chain. And so for medical supplies, medical services, healthcare, the cooling is also very important to basically understand and also to design in an efficient and effective way. Another thing, Indonesia is also a country which is very active, seen as a major, emitter of greenhouse gases, and that is because we have a lot of rice plantations. We have some cattle, not too much, but we are basically a major producer of agricultural products. And even in the agriculture sector, we have a need for, of course, for the logistics, which is chilled or cold, because of the food waste problem. So if we don't produce and effectively distribute, disseminate to the population and export in many cases, then much of it, what we produce is basically a waste. Yeah? So reducing waste by doing effective cooling I think is a major issue that we need to tackle in Indonesia, and it directly touches our consumers, our citizens, and in many cases also in bridging over to the industrial park. There's a lot of SMEs, a lot of small, medium-sized enterprises that are directly involved in this thing. Now talking about the industry, I talked a lot already about the consumers, the citizens. It is, I think, important to understand that a localization of the industry itself helps in this regard for logistical purposes, also for, if you think about the servicing of the equipment, you need local capability not only to service, but actually in some cases also to produce some of the elements of the basically the overall process. And I think for that you need qualified personnel. So the education, it was said a lot already about the behavior of the consumers. That is very important. We need to educate the Indonesian citizens that it is very adamant to have a very conscious behavior towards energy consumption, which will reduce the need for cooling as well. At the same time, in order to keep our systems at a good level, in order to make them, not make them efficient, but keep them efficient for many years to come, it is important to have the personnel available in country to service those equipment in country as well. I think that's it, what I have to say. Thank you very much, and I give it back to the moderator.
Well done, thank you. So training's another aspect there. Now I'm going to turn it to Hakan Hamdi Bergalu from Arçelik.
Hakan is good enough, thanks.
Okay.
First of all, I'll start by saying everything Christine said I agree with. It's just easier to get it out of the way that way. We need regulation, and very aggressive regulation everywhere. We need to maximize energy efficiency in all appliances globally. And you will not hear a CEO of one of the world's largest appliance manufacturers say that. So I've said that. The second point I will make is that we've been doing a lot over the past 15 years. And we've been doing this because we think it makes very good business sense. We lead the Dow Jones Sustainability Index. And I'll tell you why that's important. There are a few reasons. The first one is scale, as I mentioned. We manufacture and sell 50 million appliances globally a year that are manufactured in 29 plants across the globe. The second reason is most of our operations, or many of our operations, are in the developing world, where the difference between winning and losing this fight is going to make all the difference. And those are the markets where regulation is absent. What have we been doing? Well, I used to as a leadership team, we used to pat ourselves on the back and say we've been climate neutral, carbon neutral for the past 3-4 years now, which is an achievement in itself without buying carbon credit, by the way. That's an important distinction because it's easy if you're buying carbon credit. I mean, it's absolutely meaningless. The only thing that really matters is Scope 3 emissions, which is 98% of the emissions we cause, by the way. And 80% of that is in the use phase of the appliances that we sell. So the efficiency of those appliances determines everything. And we've committed to the 1.5 degree path. net zero by 2050. But more importantly, in the past 15 years, we've been able to reduce what our air conditioners consume by 85%, refrigeration consumes by 56%. Most of this is voluntary, by the way. And further to that, we have committed by 2030 to reduce refrigeration consumption by another 56%, which is, we don't know how to do that yet. All we're saying is we're going to commit a lot of technology, R&D, and innovation capability to actually try and make that a reality. I think what's really important is on the way to becoming a net zero company, really internalizing this as a strategy. I mean, at the moment, if you ask any person that works for us across the globe, whether it's South Africa, the US, China, Russia, Ukraine, doesn't really matter, they will all say the same thing. They work for this company because it is the most sustainable business. It has taken the leadership and commitment to a different level and will continue to actually strive for that leadership. And I believe that a time has come, consumers are willing to pay a difference for that most sustainable business, service, or product. And yeah, this is a way of life for us. It's not just something to talk about.
Thanks so much. Jürgen, would you like to make a few comments?
Yeah, I can do that. We are representing Danfoss, so I'm representing Danfoss, and Danfoss is a supplier to the cooling industry in total. So basically we are supplying to manufacturers of air conditioners, manufacturers of any kind of cooling equipment. And I have to say, when I joined the company, cooling was not so much at the heart of the society. People usually forget about cooling. It's kind of standard, you're used to it, it works. But in the meantime, it's a part of the solution of our global energy crisis. It's a part of the solution of our global food crisis. It is increasing the health of the people and most likely also at one point in time the wealth of the people, because with cold chains they can produce food and sell it and live a better life. At Danfoss we have already in 1933 started to produce cooling technology, our founder. And later on in the 50s, and I'm saying that because it's again and still important, we have started to educate, to train people in Latin America, anywhere in the world on cooling technology. And that has most likely helped to develop proper equipment and proper components. And we learn a lot in order to develop components which help to achieve the targets you have, my pre-speakers have mentioned here. Because without good components, technology, you have a hard time in reducing the energy consumption. And I have to say, from a Danfoss perspective, we very often see the price as being the dominating factor. Cheap, 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 and not efficient, 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 and also not long-lasting and circular, and all these topics is much more the price, because nobody really cares long-term about that. We have also decided to eat our own medicine, so we are also part of SBTi. We have recently announced that, and we have now generated our campus here, which will be energy CO2 neutral by 2022. We are not that far yet to be totally CO2 neutral, but we have a 250,000 square meter campus here where you can see the technology in life. And I'm actually very proud to have all you here in Sonderborg, and I'm not Danish, I'm German, so I'm most likely very credible in saying that here. This is a super big laboratory of seeing things in life. You see modern cooling technology. You can visit a supermarket where we are having the most modern technology in the supermarket, at the same time recovering the heat, the excess heat, because otherwise it would be wasted. So I'm a little bit pledging for the systemic view here. I understand that a fridge is a fridge, but we are very often producing big fridges and cold storages, and JP Clausen sitting here, data centers, and all that has to be integrated. It's all cooling technology. And last but not least, also the solution to the world heating problems is cooling technology. We shouldn't forget that. That allows companies to have huge scale in suddenly being also in heating and consequently reducing cost for the solutions to allow the world to use modern technology.
Thanks. And next we have Ambassador Khan to make a few remarks.
Thank you, Moderator. Excellency Joseph Comfort, Minister for Foreign Affairs of Denmark. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. First and foremost, I would like to express my sincere appreciations to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Denmark and the IEA for jointly organizing this conference. For the purpose of this session, I would like to say a few words on Cambodia's commitment to efficient, climate-friendly cooling. Following the UN Secretary General calling for the development of the National Cooling Action Plan, Cambodia has already taken actions to solve the cooling challenges by developing a National Cooling Action Plan to be launched soon, and linking cooling to our update NDC. The action plan provides a good pathway for FHC Freestone for effective implementation of the Kigali Amendment, which Cambodia has ratified on 8 April 2021. Cooling is a critical issue for Cambodia development. Energy efficient, climate-friendly cooling solutions are expected to deliver a large economic benefit, as well as numerous co-benefits, including human health and energy security. The phase down of FHC in the cooling sector, coupled with energy efficiency, renewable energy, and demand reduction measure with double the climate benefit. Adoption of this solution is a clear win-win strategy of our economy and for climate change actions. Significant work lie ahead for us to raise awareness of this solution and design the incentive and regulation required to achieve change at scale. These include the improvement to building code, energy efficiency standard, and the accessibility of efficient and renewable cold chain technology solutions. What we need now is financing at scale to implement this initiative. Currently, relevant actions feature prominently in our NDC, and partners such as UNDP and UNEP have helped to put together concrete proposals to move this agenda forward in Cambodia. So I thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Great. I want to thank all the panelists for your introductory remarks. Now we're going to get into the Q&A, and there won't be any zingers, I promise. Dr. Omrani, are you still on the line? She's not there. Okay, we'll move along. Next up, I think I was going to go to, just one second here. Jürgen, I'll ask you a question. I'm going a little out of order here. Cold chains are critical for keeping food fresh and safe and need to grow dramatically. What do you think we need to do to scale sustainable cold chains?
Yeah, I think it has been mentioned before, food waste is the third largest country in emitting CO2. It's bigger, it's coming after China and the US, and it's a huge amount of energy which is being wasted. And by the way, a lot of CO2 you need to emit to produce the same food again, if you at all can do that. So for us, it's very important that we help to secure the food chains from farm to fork or from fish to fork. Most of the food is wasted right at the beginning, so on a field, before it comes to the first interaction in a factory. So I think we have to support models where we supply cooling equipment on a field, like solar-powered off-grid cold rooms, and 8 degrees is absolutely sufficient for that, by the way, to enlarge the food lifetime by a couple of days, which is sufficient. Second, we need to work on technologies to have to use refrigerants which are not hazardous if they leak. Then these refrigerants are causing CO2 emissions at the end in global warming. And last but not least, we need to be efficient in the final processing of the meat and of the food in a global cold chain. I think most important, however, is to educate people. And if we have a focus on, for example, Africa at the moment, there is a very nice thing happening in Kigali. It's named ACES, which is the African Center of Excellence in Sustainable Cold Chain, where many companies and also Danfoss are participating in building a kind of a big lab and education environment to train installers on sustainable cooling. Because at the end, We need the people to understand it, to be able to do it, to use the tools we give them in their hands. I think that's, for me, the most important thing, that we all together, industry, politics, NGOs, help in educating people what modern technology is and what can be done in the future.
Thanks. Akan, a question for you. Your company has a strong presence in developing countries where the energy infrastructure might be unstable and power consumption is rising. So how do you apply energy-efficient cooling solutions to these markets where you operate?
It's very complex, but you're right. We have operations South Africa, Pakistan, Bangladesh, India, Indonesia, all of these markets where obviously consumption is going to grow over time. As the heat comes on, and we're all living that every day, it's impossible to tell those consumers to not consume air conditioners. It's just not possible. Again, for food security, food waste, refrigeration, a new generation of appliances are needed. It's clear. I mean, the temperatures just last week in Jacobabad in Pakistan reached 51 degrees or 31 degrees wet bulb moment. I don't know if you know what that is. A wet bulb moment is when the temperature is hot enough, but the humidity at the same time is so high that your body loses its ability to cool itself. So essentially, you cannot survive outdoors. And the number of cities hitting that threshold is increasing every day. So you can't tell those people who will die if they go outside that they can't buy air conditioning. They will buy air conditioning. And there's about 3.6 billion cooling appliances now, we say. You said 1 billion earlier, later, maybe, but the numbers I have say by 2050 we're looking at 12 billion appliances altogether. So it's clear that it is severely underestimated what is going to happen in emerging markets. What do we do? Well, first of all, we've committed to this 50% cut by 2030, which means roughly 11.5 million tons, equivalent of what Croatia emits in 1 year in terms of savings from emissions. But the easiest thing for a leadership team of a company that produces appliances is to quit the air conditioning business. Because the only way we can keep those commitments with this growth in air conditioning is by creating very efficient appliances, but it needs to be a level playing field in those markets, because we sell the most energy efficient appliances, but the competition does not. And especially many competitors coming from China don't have the moral standards yet, or the awareness yet that is needed to actually voluntarily stop selling inefficient appliances. I'll tell you one story how effective it can be. South Africa is extremely challenged in terms of its power grid. It's been underinvested for so long that they have rolling blackouts. We bought a business there in 2011, roughly 40% market share in the cooling market, and we went from selling D-rated refrigerators to A-rated refrigerators only. And we were the only manufacturer in the market to do that. We expected to lose some market share because there's some cost increase involved. It did not happen. Our market share today is up. DeFi has a much better brand name in South Africa. And we reduced energy consumption from cooling in South Africa single-handedly by 50%. That I like calculating these things in the number of coal-fired power plants we saved, which is 2 for South Africa. Not that they were building them, but at least they don't have to build them. So this kind of approach of voluntarily businesses taking the lead in the absence of regulation, I think is critical. But I, to be honest, can't wait for regulation, a universal regulation globally, which, faced with the cost of what's coming because of this, it makes no sense to me that the world cannot come up with a set of rules and guidelines that binds everyone to actually simply use the best technology available. So that's how we deal with it, and that's how we'll continue to deal with it. It's not always easy. There are markets where purchasing power, especially now, is severely challenged in high inflation times, but we will stick to this strategy.
Great, thanks. Christine, this probably is a great segue to you. So how do we meet the rising demand for cooling, including for the most vulnerable, while keeping emissions low? And there's clearly a role for regulations to raise the floor.
Yeah, I think it's really critical to just emphasize that I think when we're in a room like this, in a very comfortable place in Denmark, you can lose the people part of this equation. And so even just talking about the cold chain example and educating people, there's a farmer whose livelihood will increase 3, 4, 5, 10x if they can actually recover. They're quite motivated, actually. And so I think the first thing that we need to do is to look at the sector broadly. Cooling is cold chain, cooling is fans. A lot of those Pakistanis are not going to be able to afford an air conditioner. They're going to actually have to be cooled by a fan. And we need to take a comprehensive look to make sure that we're meeting the demand from a personal perspective, from a public health perspective, from a livelihoods perspective, and realizing that, yes, we have our mitigation goals, but there's very much a personal equation with quite a lot at stake. I personally would love to see more CEOs say the kinds of things my colleague from Arslick is saying. I'd also love to see them meet me and my team behind closed doors in the regulatory discussions that we're having to make sure that those discussions are equally as ambitious of where we're actually setting the regulations. And overall, my call for both policymakers and for the industry and for manufacturers is the time is now to actually maximize ambition. We have a really narrow window, and in particular, the cooling sector can trounce our climate goals. So it's time for ambition.
Thanks, and to put a finer point on that, all the equipment that's going to be installed, we're locking in 10 plus years of additional energy waste and emissions if we don't get it right. So these decisions really make a difference not only now, but for many years to come. Ilman, I want to switch to you. What can be done to make cooling equipment, whether it's a ceiling fan, a refrigerator, or an air conditioner, more affordable and accessible for low-income consumers?
Great question. Thank you very much. I think, well, you mentioned already an important component. If we say cooling, it's not just in air conditioning, it's also the ceiling fan. I think the ceiling fan in the last years has become larger. You see big rooms with very big ceiling fans, and that contributes a lot to the cooling, actually, and is definitely reducing carbon emissions. I think personally that what can be done is the designs can be changed in a way that you can produce it more locally. I'm thinking about, well, if you say, there's something like a Fab City movement in the world, where basically you distribute design to various places around the world, and you can print components or hold the product in other centers around the world. And it would make the designs maybe more understandable and producible locally in many places around the world, at the same time reduce the need for logistics to distribute. And also put the, basically empower the local industries to participate in the industrial, in the industry that supplies to the cooling. So R&D is needed because of that. Innovation is needed. And I think what we see in a few years from now, and that actually not only applies to the cooling industry, it's many industries, even electric scooters can be produced in many places around the world. The Fab City movement is something that comes from MIT. Many cities around the world, I think Copenhagen, I'm not sure whether Copenhagen is a Fab City, but the target is in 2054. Many things, if not everything, but as much as possible can be produced locally. That is things that we need in our life, the energy, food, etc., etc. And by that, we really are in control of the so-called circular regenerative economy, because it's not something of a global scale, which is sort of difficult for us to understand. But if you control it more locally, including the production aspect, then I think that is something the way to go, and it would also, by the way, diminish the economic divide between countries and people. Yeah.
Thanks so much. Turning to you, Ambassador Khan, how can policy tools, you mentioned the National Cooling Action Plan, help us meet our climate goals, in particular in your country?
Well, thank you for your question. I think the National Cooling Action Plan are the key action for policymakers to create enabling conditions to accelerate the joint actions on energy efficiency and the HFC phase down, and provide market signal and investment security to produce and to the producer and end user, and prepare for future cooling requirement to deliver on the goal of Kigali Amendment, Paris Climate Agreement, and the SDG. The National Cooling Action Plan will allow us to integrate energy efficiency with the refrigerant phase down. As such, we are right now working with UNEP and also UNESCAP to develop a comprehensive cross-sectoral national cooling action plan. This national cooling action plan will help us leverage the potential of passing building solution and cold chains as the means to tackle the cooling challenges and to enhance the effective implement our NDG targets. Our capital, Phnom Penh, its weakness is a construction boom and the lack of attention given the sustainability, energy efficiency interventions. Climate-friendly refrigerant adoption potential for emission reduction in the cooling sector is conservatively estimated to be 2.61 metric ton CO2 over the next 10 years. And with the current technology available, and for the intervention focus on building and cool chain are estimate to contribute about 70 to 80% of this reduction potential. Also, solutions like building code and or minimum energy performance standard, efficient and renewable cold chain technology solution, and green infrastructure can limit the massive growth in energy needs for cooling, saving money and reduce energy poverty. I thank you, moderator.
Thanks. So that completes the planned questions. Now we're going to make this even more interesting. So many of you go to the COP and have your own aspirations and dreams about what's going to happen. So close your eyes, imagine you're at the COP and you just left the COP and this amazing thing happened related to cooling. What would that be other than living in a world where we no longer need to have COPs? Anybody want to take that? What would you like to see happen at the next COP related to cooling?
Well, I mean, I'll start. I keep saying the same thing. All the governments basically agreeing on a very high standard for energy efficiency. There are 4 product groups. People don't realize this. Air conditioning, cooling meaning refrigeration, electric motors, and lighting. That consumes 40% of all power. That's actually what I learned from him, Fatih. So if we were to use existing technologies today in terms of the most efficient technologies available to us, on just those 4 product categories, we would save the equivalent of the entire United States emissions annually. Meaning we would solve the problem, or most of the problem. We could decommission 2,100 coal-fired power plants around the world. That's how powerful it is. So instead of looking for the pie in the sky, green hydrogen, green steel, great, but require massive investment, unproven technologies, carbon capture, all of these things are great, and technology will be part of the solution. But the solution's in front of our eyes, and it's ridiculous to me that we don't take advantage of that. So it is not just the governments that are responsible, it's also businesses that are responsible. And at COP26, I was very excited to see that businesses see an opportunity now in climate leadership, because they're understanding as the world gets warmer, people are paying attention. So suddenly, instead of saying, the average CEO is 50-something male, why would they worry about, what's going to happen 10 years later? Let the next guy deal with it. Now they're paying attention. Another thing that's happening that I'd like to see at COP27 in Egypt, people don't realize how close 2030 is. And 2030 is an arbitrary date. For some reason, everybody's agreed on this arbitrary point that these targets will be achieved or set by. It's ridiculous. But let's go along with this ridiculous theme. It's only 395 weeks away. People have to stop thinking of it in abstract, long-term, or it's someone else's problem. It is our problem, and it's coming. And it's only 395 weeks away. So we need to attack this problem on a weekly basis and really increase the urgency around it. So that's That's what I'd like to see come out.
I think we've got a shared vision there. Ilham, then Christine, and if you could keep your remarks short, because Dr. Barol here is to give us some closing remarks.
Thank you very much. Maybe I just highlight one aspect. I think you mentioned COP. What I would really like to see is a COP that comes to a result is really committed and it's sort of like implemented as such by all countries that participate in COP. And that's something very difficult. Because I think in the end, the perception of many countries, and I speak particularly from countries from the developing world, is that it needs to be a fair thing, a fair deal between countries, right? So the current situation is basically there because of certain factors and certain things that happened in the history, but the future is all ours, and so there is something like a fairness, and I don't want to be too specific, but I can see in my own country that there's a lot of thoughts about that, and therefore that fairness aspect needs to be really highlighted in the whole thing, I think. That would be my small comment to this. Thank you.
Thanks. Christine?
I just wanted to follow on to the comment about 2030. And if what we're trying to do is achieve certain outcomes by 2030, we need to be implementing those policies in the next 2 to 3 years. And so it's not just that we have until 2030. And so at the next COP, I would like for us to just not start talking about what we're doing now in the context of what we want to achieve by 2030, but it's just to say, if this isn't the moment for energy efficiency policy to be locked in and mitigate, then I can pivot to growing radishes and hanging out with my kids. So
Save that thought. Jürgen?
My wish would be to have an initiative on education. I think we are really lacking in this industry talents. We are lacking especially female talents. There is a lot of women in this room, which is not very typical for conferences in cooling. It's maybe only 1% or so. So if we don't change that fast, if we don't get people to this industry and attract them and say, this is the solution for many problems in the world in the future, and have education programs which do not last 10 years, right, or 5 years. We really have to speed up. Otherwise, we have no chance, in my opinion, to install and transform the solutions we have in mind and which are there into real world.
Thanks. I'm going to take off my moderator hat for 30 seconds, if you'll indulge me. And my dream would be, imagine many manufacturers walk up to the dais and say, we have a new air conditioner that will have 5 times lower climate impact than today's conventional air conditioners. That's called the 5X. There was a global cooling prize that brought those prototypes. They were tested in the lab and proven to work. Let's make sure those are available in the market as soon as possible. So with that, I want to thank all the panelists. And remember, I spoke to you that we're going to have lunch soon, and we mentioned that delicious sandwich. Now the last part of the sandwich that will make us whole, I'd like to introduce Dr. Fatih Birol.
So, very many thanks. I just came here to thank all of you for discussing this very important issue. Now, 4 years ago, at the IEA, I like numbers. I like to make my hands dirty with numbers. When I look at the electricity demand in many emerging countries, I spotted one issue. I told my colleagues, can you break down the drivers of electricity demand in emerging countries? The reason I am saying this, when I go to Asia or Africa or Latin America, the main preoccupation of the several energy ministers and economy ministers is the following. How am I going to build the next power plant? Is it coal, it is gas, it is renewables? How am I going to finance it? And how I'm going to get the licensing and so on. So, because the demand is very strong, electricity demand is very strong. So when my colleagues broke down the drivers of electricity demand in emerging countries, in many countries, I have seen the cooling is the key driver. Unbelievable. Then I told my colleagues, is Brian here? Brian? This is one of the blind spots of the energy policy making. So we have started this air conditioning, how we are going to make countries around the world, from India to Indonesia, from Indonesia to African countries, Latin America, in order to make sure that they have the right norms and standards. I'm so happy to see that the many countries are now improving their norms, standards, and the protocols they have, and putting pressure on the manufacturers to come up with the best practices. Some companies are doing themselves, but some countries need regulatory measures here. So why I'm saying this, as I said, perhaps some of you were there in the morning, when you look at the household, the air conditioner ownership rate, there is a huge gap between the advanced economies and the developing countries. And in developing countries, it is one of the basic human rights to have a comfortable homes, and with the increasing temperature, I mean, we have seen in the last few weeks in Asia, we had 50 degrees plus temperature, so people will buy air conditioners, and this will push the electricity demand up, but instead of building a new power plant, you put codes and the standards and norms for the air conditions. So this is a major preoccupation for the IEA. We work with many governments, and we are sharing the best practices, how to draft a legislation, how to monitor it, how to empower it, how to look at the next steps and trying to put pressure recently with the ASEAN countries. And it's a very important group, by the way, ASEAN. I should tell you, they're a bit behind the shadows of China and India, but when you look at the ASEAN countries, it's about 500 million people with a huge population growth and economic growth coming there. We are hoping that very soon ASEAN countries will adopt air conditioning norms and standards for their production processes. So I want to thank once again to our chairman and the panelists and all of you for putting light on this, one of the key blind spots of the energy policy making. Thank you very much. Thank you.
With that, we're adjourned. I want to thank everybody. Have a great lunch. And again, thanks to the panelists.